Hi everyone, this is a news story, especially for the Life Stories channel. Enjoy watching. I found myself in the midst of preparing to attend a memorial service of my beloved mother-in-law who had recently passed away. Suddenly, out of nowhere, my phone starts ringing. Do not even think about coming to the funeral. Immediately return to your parents' residence in the rural countryside. What? Perplexed yet obedient, I promptly made my way back home to the rural Midwest, my place of origin. Later on, my husband informed me about the existence of his estranged and detestable sister, Jessica. So our dear mother has departed, huh? How much of the inheritance am I entitled to? The audacity of her attempting to benefit from my mother-in-law's estate is unforgivable. In that moment, I made the decision to defend my mother-in-law's reputation and confront this wicked sister-in-law. Eventually, after a fierce exchange of words, my sister-in-law found herself confined to a dark and chilly cell. My name is Kristen, an ordinary homemaker. I am married to Charles, an employee at a company, and we lead a profoundly content life together. I have heard that many women face difficulties in their relationships with their husbands' families after marriage, particularly between a daughter-in-law and her mother-in-law, where rumors of hidden and brutal conflicts often circulate. I too used to hold such a gloomy perception. However, fortunately, I have been able to enjoy a harmonious married life in that aspect. Yes, I had a wonderful bond with my husband's mother, Charlotte. For instance, Kristen, what do you think of this knitted cardigan? I made it with you in mind. For me? Thank you. It's absolutely adorable, and your knitting skills are truly remarkable. I'm delighted. You enjoy it. The breeze is becoming cold, so take care not to catch a cold. Definitely. Hey, if it's okay with you, could you show me how to knit sometime? It was just like that. Charlotte's grin was always filled with warmth and kindness. I owed her so much, she had even assisted us financially at times. I adored my gentle mother-in-law and regarded her as a second mother. But then, Kristen, Mom passed away in the hospital. I received the news of Charlotte's demise just the other day. I was taken aback by her passing, and for a while I could barely eat anything. But I suppose that's reality, and I have to accept it. Come to think of it, Charlotte had been diagnosed with terminal cancer a few years ago and had been undergoing chemotherapy treatment ever since. It must have been a really difficult battle. Whenever I visited her, Charlotte always welcomed me with a smile. Surely she was doing her utmost not to worry us. I couldn't just stand there crying for her. I decided to bid her farewell with a smile. With that in mind, I was preparing to attend my mother-in-law's funeral, which was to be held at my husband's family home. Then all of a sudden, my cell phone, sitting on the table, began ringing. Curiously, I checked my phone and saw my husband's family's number displayed on the screen. My husband had gone ahead to prepare for the ceremony. Maybe he had forgotten something. I casually picked up the phone and placed it to my ear. Once upon a time, in a distant land, a peculiar incident occurred. It all began with a phone call from my dear husband Charles. His voice trembled with urgency as he pleaded for me to return to my parents' tranquil countryside abode immediately. Bewildered, I inquired about the reason behind his panicked state. Charles apologized and mentioned that there had been a minor setback at the event we were attending. He assured me that he would explain everything once we were reunited. Naturally, I was filled with confusion and curiosity. What could this problem be that had Charles so flustered? Nevertheless, I decided to follow his instructions and make my way to my parents' house. Charles insisted that I take a taxi, promising to join me shortly. With a brief goodbye, he abruptly ended the call. My mind buzzed with unanswered questions, but I trusted that Charles had a valid explanation for his unusual behavior. Thus, I altered my plans and redirected my journey from his family home to my childhood abode. The weight of the situation pressed upon me, intensifying the need for answers. Upon my arrival, my parents greeted me with concern and confusion. They too were baffled by the circumstances that had unfolded. However, without Charles present, we could only speculate and await his arrival anxiously. Time seemed to crawl as we nervously anticipated his appearance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Charles burst through the door. Worriedly, he checked on my well-being before I had the chance to inquire about his injured hand. Observing the bandaged appendage, my heart sank. Charles winced in pain, his face contorted with agony. It was evident that his injury had caused him great distress. With a heavy sigh, Charles began to recount the events that had transpired. It transpired at his parents' residence, and the entire situation surrounding it evidently. Seemingly, my spouse possesses a sibling 3 years his senior named Jessica. Allegedly, this Jessica was an exceedingly disobedient offspring, causing disturbances for the family from a tender age. It appears that she has had numerous encounters with law enforcement beyond quantification. His mother, Charlotte, never relinquished hope for such a daughter and consistently offered apologies to those in their vicinity. She even assumed responsibility for the debts that Jessica accrued. "I will certainly repay it. All right? Please, Mom." She believed her daughter's words, but Jessica betrayed that vow and departed from home. Jessica was estranged from my spouse's family, resulting in a complete lack of communication until today. And then, on the day of her mother's funeral, Jessica unexpectedly arrived at his parents' abode. After such a prolonged period, one might assume that she would have matured to some extent. However, the utterance that escaped Jessica's lips was, "So, Mom's deceased, correct? How much of the inheritance am I entitled to?" Naturally, my spouse was livid at her demeanor. Was that truly the first thing to utter following their mother's demise? He proceeded to angrily inform his sister that she had been disowned long ago. Furthermore, to Charlotte, her daughter was no longer Jessica, but Kristen. In other words, myself. What? Kristen? Who is that woman? It is preposterous that she can inherit while the genuine daughter cannot. Upon learning the truth, Jessica became infuriated. Her face became flushed with embarrassment. Suddenly, she grabbed my spouse's cell phone and angrily left the house, hurling hostile remarks in our direction. It turns out, the injury on my husband's hand was caused by her biting him during that incident. I immediately remotely locked the phone, but it seemed like she may have discovered our home address and seen Kristen's face in the contact list and photos. Oh goodness, I can hardly believe what I'm hearing. I was momentarily speechless upon hearing my husband's words. I was taken aback to find out for the first time that Charlotte had a daughter, and it was even more shocking to discover that she was such an awful individual. I apologize for keeping my sister a secret. It's a personal family matter. But now, my husband apologized with a pained expression. We contemplated how to handle the situation, trying to uplift my distressed husband's spirits. "Well, perhaps we should stay away from our residence in the city for a while, just to be safe," he suggested. "Is our address at our country home secure?" Yes, I didn't save that information on my phone. So, as a precautionary measure, we decided to stay at our country home. And then, as the new day began, the sun rose, and the melodious sounds of birds filled the atmosphere. "I'm heading off to work. If anything comes up, reach me on my backup phone." "All right, have a wonderful day." I watched my husband drive away to work, a smile on my face. But deep down, I was consumed by anxiety. What if my sister-in-law appeared? What if she attacked me? These concerns plagued my mind incessantly. Every time I closed my eyes, I envisioned Jessica's furious countenance directed at me, the ancestral residence of my spouse's family. However, to my astonishment, life at our countryside abode was tranquil. Day after day went by without any incidents, and time flowed peacefully. The worries and tensions that had been troubling me were gradually diminishing, now barely noticeable. If only this problem with my sister-in-law could simply vanish, I began to think optimistically. That's when the situation took a turn. Pardon me, are Charles and Kristen, the couple present at this location? On that day, a law enforcement officer from the nearby police station arrived at our dwelling. What is this regarding? I asked hesitantly, filled with a dreadful anticipation, and it turned out to be accurate. Apparently, our urban residence had been burglarized. The police had just received a call from the crime scene. I contacted my spouse to inform him of the incident, and we hurried back to our home together. And when we arrived, indeed, the house had been ransacked. Every drawer was open, as if a tempest had swept through. Is anything missing? Inquired the officer. Well, let's see. Prompted by the officer, we inspected the interior of our house under their supervision. Our bank books and other valuable items appeared to be secure for the time being. However, a few $100s that were supposed to be in our dresser were gone. By the way, based on a neighborhood inquiry, a suspicious woman had been observed in this vicinity multiple times over the past few days. This woman was reportedly shouting in front of our house, uttering phrases like, "Come out," and "Pay me back." Charles, could that be her? I'm quite certain. I am 90% confident that it's Jessica. My spouse nodded while gazing at me. We explained the recent problem with my sister-in-law to the authorities. The issue of the disrupted funeral, the stolen mobile phone, and my spouse's injured hand. The police responded quite smoothly. It was likely because we had previously reported the mobile phone incident to them. Afterwards, we had to provide a more detailed statement at the police station and didn't return to our rural residence until it began to grow dark. The intruder was apprehended shortly thereafter. As anticipated, the culprit was Jessica, my sister-in-law. According to the police, she was bold enough to stay in a hotel near the scene of the crime after the burglary. Supposedly, she was taken into custody while casually receiving a massage from room service. Naturally, she paid for all of this with the money she stole from our house. Despite admitting to the offense, she denied committing the burglary. Although I didn't comprehend the specifics, it appeared that when family was involved in a crime, things weren't so straightforward. Anyhow, we were summoned back to the police station once again. Accompanied by the responsible officer, we were led into the chamber, and there sat a dark-haired woman sulking in her seat. Suddenly, she blurted out indignantly, "Charles, how could you do something like this to your own family? It's unbelievable." Jessica showed no remorse whatsoever. In fact, she didn't even seem to believe she had done anything wrong. She likely behaved in this manner during the police interrogations. Interrogation also occurred. As per her account, she did not enter the house with the intention to burglarize it. She claimed that she had come to discuss matters related to inheritance, but since we were always away, she had no alternative but to break the window and enter. Even the money she took was only necessary for her to stay in a nearby location, so she stated. In other words, it was entirely our fault. What a narrow-minded and self-centered way of thinking. To consider that such a perilous individual held resentment against me. If I had encountered her while I was alone, who knows what might have transpired? The mere thought sent shivers down my spine. Meanwhile, my husband Charles and my sister-in-law were engaged in a heated argument. "You have quite the audacity to appear after all these years and pretend to be a part of the family. Return my phone, will you? Very well, I shall return it. You immediately locked it, so I couldn't even use it properly. Just like you, huh? Besides, family is family, isn't it? Both Mom and I severed ties with you a long time ago. That means you have no claim to her inheritance. Oh, regarding that matter, leaving all her money to a stranger's daughter instead of her own. Was the old woman out of her mind or something? Please refrain from uttering such disgraceful remarks." Before I realized it, I found myself shouting. I couldn't tolerate her disrespect towards Charlotte, but Jessica fired back, glaring at me, sounding quite irritated. "You're that Kristen woman, correct? The one who took the inheritance that was meant for me." "No, I didn't take anything. I mean, what are you implying?" With that, Jessica began to approach me aggressively. I hate to admit it, but her intense gaze made me feel scared. I couldn't find the words I wanted to say. Jessica seemed to see right through me, snorted, and burst into laughter, looking triumphant. At that moment, the police officer sitting with us cleared his throat and intervened. Let's all calm down, everyone. It seems there's a lot going on, so why don't you have a family discussion first? He must have deemed it a family matter based on our exchange. We can address the charges and everything else later, he said, bringing the situation under control. Later on, we arranged a formal discussion at our relative's house. In a living room adorned with carpet, Charlotte's family gathered around a large table. In the midst of this tense atmosphere, it was Jessica who spoke up first. If you give me my portion of the inheritance, I'll overlook all the past rudeness. You should be thankful for my generosity. Jessica was still as arrogant as always. Well, it was to be expected. There was no way someone who hadn't changed in over a decade would suddenly change in just a few days. Every time she opened her mouth, she kept insisting, "Give me the inheritance." Drop the charges. Of course, we had no intention of meeting her demands. We've reiterated time and time again, you or I was disinherited, so I am unable to receive any of my mother's inheritance. However, why don't you all provide me with some funds once you receive the inheritance? There is no way that preposterous idea is going to be accepted, my husband said, visibly frustrated. I managed to calm him down and then turned my attention to Jessica, trying my best to remain composed. Jessica, did you thoroughly read Charlotte's will? There was a section that concerned you as well. I am only interested in the part regarding the inheritance. The rest is most likely just her grievances against me. No, Charlotte was genuinely worried about you. She deeply regretted her actions, I explained. Well, in that case, she should have given me the inheritance even more so, Jessica scoffed in annoyance. My anger was boiling inside me, but I also felt an overwhelming sense of sadness. She viewed her own mother, Charlotte, as nothing more than a convenient tool. Charlotte didn't give you any money because she knew it wouldn't change you, I stated firmly, not waiting for her response. I cannot allow a despicable person like you to have even a single penny of Charlotte's money. You have some nerve, considering you are not even blood related, Jessica retorted. I don't want to hear that from someone who has disregarded their own family ties, I replied. My words caused Jessica to falter for a moment. Then her eyes narrowed sharply as she glared at me. It was an ugly and terrifying look, but this time I couldn't look away. There is nothing more to discuss. Please leave now, I said, locking eyes with the intimidating Jessica. Suddenly, Jessica lunged across the table at me, either out of rage or fear. She was immediately restrained by my spouse and other family members who were present. 10 minutes later, the police arrived at the scene and forcefully escorted her out. Throughout the ordeal, she continued to spew insults, but by the time she was placed into the patrol car, she had completely lost her spirit and slumped her shoulders. Later on, I learned that Jessica ended up in prison. Our official report of the incident had been accepted. It turns out Jessica had accumulated a significant amount of debt from loan sharks. This hidden circumstance seemed to be the reason for her obsession with Charlotte's inheritance. Regardless, it is expected that she will lead a miserable life and never see freedom again. She simply doesn't comprehend a parent's love. She made her own bed, and now she must lie in it. We were reflecting on the recent events in our home, which was finally clean and organized after a long period of time. As my spouse offered incense in front of my mother-in-law's portrait, he said, I was surprised, Kristen, to see you argue so courageously. Well, that's because I reviewed my mother-in-law's will once again. The truth is, I had read the will the day before when I spoke with my sister-in-law. I hadn't had the opportunity to thoroughly examine it before. The will was filled with Charlotte's heartfelt emotions, almost like a letter. Every word she had written stirred up strong emotions within me. Charlotte had always been concerned about her child's well-being. Without holding any grudges, she worried about her child's happiness, and she bravely ascended to the celestial realm, desiring our joy as a due. She would have desired to accomplish numerous tasks for her biological offspring. As I clutched my sweater firmly, I began to well up with emotion contemplating my mother-in-law. Witnessing my distress, my spouse attempted to uplift my spirits. "Kristen, would you fashion something for me as well?" "Certainly, I will demonstrate my late relative's knitting technique," I uttered, wiping away the tears from the corner of my eyes with a grin. "We shall make valuable use of her bequest." From that moment onward, I made a solemn pledge in my innermost being to lead a contented existence for the sake of Charlotte as well.